And we're back after upgrading our system so that we could actually run the interview.
Sorry about that, y'all. Zoom difficulties.
All right, so the bit I was about to get about is actually the reaction that occurred to this by financial institutions, particularly by companies such as Acorn and Robinhood, who both and some others, E-Trade, smaller investment portfolios and ones that allow for you to do small level investments, shut off the stock. They said you couldn't trade it in their applications anymore, but they weren't preventing the buying and selling of the stock by major organizations or hedge funds or any other. Like you have a JP Morgan, they were buying, right? That
As I
only
understand,
affected the smaller investors and not any of these large conglomerated investment groups.
right, as I've understood it, they only enabled people to sell their shares, not to buy new shares.
Right, and they're still not allowing people to buy shares in a lot of these applications and things, which is interesting because it kind of shows the absurdity of capitalism, which is that the market doesn't work, right? It's all a Ponzi scheme to create wealth for the ultra rich who use tricks and little gambits to make money and not actually maintain any kind of force or labor, right? Like we aren't, like you can say what you want about the robber barons, right? But at least labor led to wealth, right? In these situations, the world we live in right now, they're just barons. Nothing creates wealth,
Mhm.
right? A literal algorithmic switch is what they rely upon to create wealth. There's no actual value added to any of these economic interactions.
Right. It's like Dr. King said, there's two economic systems in this country. There's rugged individualism for the poor and socialism for the very wealthy, or there's socialism for the wealthy and rugged individualism for everybody else. I forget the exact quotation.
But it's even more ridiculous than that. It's just the fiatization of money, right? Like, and not what most people are talking about fiat money. I don't mean that like there's not a gold standard behind money. What I'm saying is that like it's literally the false creation of money through uh, artificial means, right? It's artificial inflation of stocks, artificial deflation of stocks that lead to them making money, and they ultimately hurt the businesses that are actually being deflated or inflated, right? Like GameStop is not going to have a good reaction to the stock manipulation that's going on. Again, it is stock manipulation, but it's not the person who bought's fault that it's stock manipulation. It's the company that attempted to short sell's fault that it is stock manipulation, right? Like,
Right, because they created an incentive for other people who are willing to engage in risky market behavior to engage in that behavior that is targeted towards that large hedge fund that can take the risk. Which is
it,
also something I find hilarious. Is this we're the people who took the risk? We like they're only willing to flaunt that when they're not paying the price for that risk. The minute that they start paying the price for that risk, all of a sudden it's please, big daddy government, come bail me out, come help me.
yeah, I mean, it's the ultimate absurdity, right? Like the way that in the so for those of you that don't realize, the name of the episode was kind of a joke at the beginning, right? Because we got our interviewer to stay over for at least a question, right? And then we got the person running for city council to use the F bomb like 3 times on our Twitch stream. So let's go. But what this episode's really about today, I mean, if we're really talking about the topics we're talking about money today, right? Like, and we're talking about the conceptualization of money within our broader market that exists right now. And that sort of marketization and the ways that our market works, the ways that our tax system works, and the ways that our budgets work all fundamentally are extraordinarily problematic and don't generate any true wealth for any individuals other than those who have extreme amounts of money to be able to manipulate it.
Here's a great example of this. I was thinking about this today because I saw somebody, a friend of mine, was arguing with conservative people about an issue we talked about last time as well, the Dakota Access Pipeline and sort of the loss of jobs by people in the oil industry. And these people don't seem to realize that the reason that an oil field worker is able to be paid $70 an hour is not because of like the glories of the free market. It's because the United States federal government props up the domestic oil industries in order to fuck over OPEC for foreign policy purposes. It has nothing to do with these American companies being the best or like American oil being cheap. It has to do with energy dependence, energy independence from a like national security perspective. And so when you're talking about how like all of our economy is fundamentally centered around the illusion of growth, the illusion of sort of like these freewheeling choices that aren't actually there, that's a great example of it. Because you have an entire industry where everyone involved in the industry believes that they're doing this amazing work that's propping them up, and in reality, like, it would be way cheaper if we got our oil from OPEC and from Russia and bought it abroad. It would be way, way, way cheaper. But we don't do that because one, we're at
79, right?
what?
Because of the OPEC embargo. That's the real
Right.
like
OPEC
strategic
could literally fuck us over whenever we want. And then like we wouldn't have any leverage over Iran to be able to hold sanctions over them. Likewise with Russia, they could just kind of do whatever they wanted and which like this is a totally legitimate thing for a nation state to want to do from a foreign policy perspective. Like energy independence is probably a good thing. The problem is rhetorically speaking, you have an entire industry of people who are sitting there like, Joe Biden is dog shit because Joe Biden is going to ruin all the oil field jobs. And it's like, well, the oil field jobs were inflated by the government to begin with because it's a national security priority. And maybe if we combine that concern for national security with the concern that we have for the climate crisis as a national security issue, then hey, maybe we actually arrive at the idea that we can be energy independent with renewable sources rather than with a non-renewable resource that is incredibly harmful to the environment, that requires infrastructure that displaces large amounts of people, et cetera, et cetera. I just find the discussion around the sort of transition away from fossil fuels to be really cynical and disgusting right now. We could have had this be a lot less dramatic had the Trump administration not made a hard lean back into it, but they did. And so now it seems like this big dramatic thing when it really does not need to be. This is all artificial. This is all manufactured. And it is imperative that we transition to cleaner sources of energy. I'm off my soapbox now, by the way.
Yeah, I'm with you when we're really talking about that. I think that we're on the same page here. I also think like there's this strategic shift that can occur right now that conservatives aren't realizing, which is that there's a strategic shift away from oil altogether. Right? Not as a commodity, right? Like we're never going to get rid of all oil commodities, but as a fuel source. Right? Like particularly for vehicles and for electrical purposes. The shift away from those two things would drop the price of oil so drastically that those countries who rely upon it, and the United States is not one of them, but those countries that rely upon that high price are the ones that are going to be destroyed. But a lot of those are potential adversaries, right? They're Russia, they're Iran, they're Saudi Arabia, they're the United Arab Emirates, right? These aren't like they're the greatest people in the world that we should be like protecting, right? And we can access those sorts of things relatively quickly.
Yeah. I don't know, but that's one example that occurs to me as an example of like an artificial market that is sort of created, because there's no real reason that we couldn't do the same for green energy if the federal government subsidized the bejesus out of it like they do oil.
To be fair, during the Obama administration, we saw just a tiny bit of that, and very quickly we went from a market in which electric vehicles could not compete with gas vehicles to a market now that electric vehicles probably in the next 10 years will outstrip gas vehicles, both in economic sense and also possibly even price.
I mean, I don't know about you, but like I could get solar panels on my house for free right now.
I don't own a home.
I could get some. Oh, well. I could get
Look
solar
at you
panels.
with your bourgeois intellectualism and your owning a home. Okay. Get the hell out of
Owning a
here.
home. The bank can take
Owning a home, i.e., under a service contract for 30 years in which you have to pay an exact amount, and if you don't, then they take away your home.
Yeah, I don't know. We could get into one of those, whether it's better to rent or own your own home. That might be air
It's
quotes.
better to squat.
Agreed.
Squatting is the correct solution.
I think
I'm wrong.
free housing is the correct solution.
The correct solution is to have the second COVID started stopped paying your rent.
Have you seen that video where the lady is in the police, the city council chamber, and she's like calling everybody out by name, and then she gets to like the police chief in the back of the room, and she's like, "And you over there, I see you smiling and looking at me and laughing, but I'm looking at this building, I'm thinking that this would make some real nice public housing." It's my favorite thing ever.
So the interesting aspect of this, like, so I think structurally we have a really good criticism of this sort of discussion, but also functionally there's a difference here that we should recognize, which is that a lot of these traders are now signed onto a class action lawsuit against these companies like Acorn and Robinhood and these other companies that took the aggressive steps to stop the sale of stocks, stop the ability to purchase stocks in this particular market, when the FCC did not shut down stock trading of this market. The New York Stock Exchange did not shut down trading of this market. These companies acted unilaterally. The problem those companies are going to run into is they did both of the wrong things at the wrong time. They first shut down the market, which is extraordinarily illegal. They don't have the legal authority to do so. And picking and choosing stocks is something that would get them removed as a potential trader by the FCC, which is a lawsuit that is currently in place. So, for instance, JP Morgan Chase cannot tell you can't buy Sony. Right? They can't, because if they could, the problem is that they could inflate stocks just by threat. Mm-hmm. Right? If you don't do what we want, then we're going to stop trading in Apple stocks. And if a large enough trader said that, that would be a huge problem for that company. So it's illegal to do. The FCC will have an issue with that. We'll have to take it up. Now, the second portion is potential lost revenues of buying and selling. And the thing with that is an extraordinarily hard thing to put a value on. Right? Lost opportunity for buys and sells.
Right? Well, shit. Robinhood was about to go on the market for an IPO. Put out for an IPO in a couple of months, and they're probably not going to do that now. Yeah. And that's a whole bunch of lost revenue that they could have made to fill their coffers and expand their programs and do a lot more type of stuff.
But what this shows us is that the rich understand class warfare and fight it together.
Yeah.
Somebody is going to lose hundreds of millions of dollars business, hundreds of millions of dollars in business. The Robinhood investors are going to lose that. But to those investors and to the ultra rich, the risk of collective action continuously on stocks when they're being shorted or in other high leverage situations in which the last thing you would want is more people to buy into your leverage, the risk of that occurring was too big to allow that company to maintain. They would rather Acorn and Robinhood and E-Trade all go under than allow for this sort of market to.
And when we say they, we mean the people who own those companies.
Yeah.
We mean the people who sit on those boards and who are directly benefiting from your participation with those apps.
Those individuals are willing to scuttle the ship to prevent you from trading in that way. Because the market fundamentally is a fake system.
That's class solidarity. And then we're over here having debates about whether or not we should participate in electoralism or not. Boy, howdy, that is a dumb fucking debate.
You know, like these sorts of discussions, right? Like, you know what? If you had a concerted campaign of destroying businesses every time they attempted to short people, and that's all you were doing, and you had thousands and thousands of investors doing that, you could end shorting. Because it would be too risky to short anything. Right? Right now, I can guarantee you, if somebody's going to do a market analysis on this in 5 years, and they're going to find that this one event probably decreased shorting by 60 or 70%.
Yeah. I think
People
like
are scared that they're going to find the next stock that gets shorted. And if they do, you damn sure know that they're going to do it again. Also, by the way, Wall Street Bets is back.
awesome. Well, here's the thing. Nobody is going to be shorting at 100% anymore. Like that's just not going to be something that's going to happen anymore. Like even if the FCC doesn't regulate it, because that was my brother's take, was that the FCC is going to like regulate shorting at 100%. I don't think they need to. I think that is not going to be a risk that people take anymore. Although we are talking about people who are who have chronic gambling addictions, so I don't know, maybe they do.
There's going to be somebody that does, right? And they're going to get hounded again. Mm-hmm. And that's going to reinforce those same things. The irony of this is that the thing in the last 20 years that has probably done the most to prevent exotic trading is going to end up being collective action.
Mm-hmm.
No legislation, no rules set by the FCC, no banking regulations, not Dodd-Frank, right? It's going to be a bunch of dudes and girls and chicks and whatever else they want to call themselves. They have weird names for themselves on that website, by the way. On that thing, they call themselves Weird Thing. Got together and said, let's pump money into this because they're shorting it at 100%. Right? The fact that those bets happened, those Wall Street bets happened, is fundamentally the reason why we're going to see banking reform. That is, if you ever needed evidence that collective action works, right? And it doesn't have to be perfect collective action. Collective action is rarely perfect, right? But as long as there is collective action, it has power.
Hold on. What do you mean that they call themselves Weird Things? So I'm looking at it and I don't see any of that.
Well, they used to call themselves Weird. Stop doing it.
Like racist things, or like I'm just confused as to what you mean, because like
misogynistic things.
Oh, okay. Because I was going to say at first it sounded like
the keyword would commonly be used at any individual who didn't partake in the ultra risky bets that were being taken on these websites.
I see. Okay.
And other such derogatory language that is traditionally derogatory towards women and not men, but is being used as a way of demasculating men.
Right. I got you. Okay.
That sort of language.
I was confused. The way you phrased it made it sound like really transphobic, and I was just very confused as to like where we were going with that.
They are also very transphobic.
Well, I figured, but I meant like your phrasing of it sounded potentially transphobic, and I was unsure.
I'm just reporting the news.
Okay, I understand. I was just confused.
I unfortunately jumped into that cesspit to see what it looked like for a little while, and can confirm not the best place to be. But they apparently created collective action, which is kind of the truth of every collective action that's ever occurred. The AIM movement, not the best place to be, but definitely led to some collective action, some indigenous rights, right?
Yeah.
Black Panther Party, not always the best place to be, right? There were some problems within those social movements, but I'll be damned if they didn't get a bunch of changes, right?
Yeah. All right. You want to move on and talk about taxes, or do we have more to?
Yeah, let's hit the taxes. I think we'll probably just like try to wrap it up relatively quickly tonight because of the interview was pretty nice.
Yeah.
But taxes. So tax season. Congratulations, everybody! February 12th, the official opening of tax season in like a week or so.
Yeah, I need to file mine.
9 days. Next Friday is the opening of tax season. If you get your taxes in early, you tend to get returns really quickly. Just letting you know. You have returns that are going to come out. But the ultimate interesting thing about taxation, and particularly for this, right, like, is whatever your tax revenue you get back is, you just gave the federal government a 0% interest loan on your money because you overpaid your taxes. Right? So, like, it's kind of crazy that, like, we allow sort of systems like this to occur. But more importantly, like, I hear a lot of people, like, really aggressively fighting against the sort of concept of taxing the rich or taxing people in any kind of way that's that's aggressive. One of the most interesting aspects of this is I read an article the other day, and this is something that will make you trip out a little bit, Eric. Did you know that the rich per capita pay a higher percentage in Social Security than they do in their federal income tax?
That doesn't surprise me, but that is insane.
Per capita. Now, this isn't everybody. Not every rich person evades taxes. Yes, they do. Don't let them. They all fucking do. Right? But rich people, the reason why this is the case is because there are no exemptions for Social Security. Right? You can't exempt out of your Social Security unless you're a teacher or a governmental worker or someone that has an alternative program. Right? But you can't opt out. Right? That's not allowed. And so I was reading this article. It was saying because there's so many that pay nothing taxes. Such an aggressive number of billionaires that don't pay a dime in taxes. That the per capita average on these people that are millionaires and billionaires is less than I think it's 11% the Social Security tax. Then 6.2% on average. They pay less than 6.2% of their income. But our money system works. Don't you know, Eric? Capitalism is good.
Yeah, capitalism is the best system ever.
And especially capitalist systems that in which like the rich don't actually pay their share.
Yeah. I don't know.
But you know what, Eric? There was no innovation in
the 19... on that. That's fucking ridiculous. The whole Warren Buffett pays less in income tax than his goddamn secretary does is ridiculous.
Well, I mean, like and there's so many instruments for this to occur, right? Like, because even if you were to get rid of things like capital gains, right, or negative capital gains taxes, right, or you were to get rid of other loopholes that exist, nothing prevents these people from offshoring their money.
There is an entire economy of offshoring. There's a really good documentary about the Panama Papers that came out somewhat recently that talks about all of these separate issues and the ways in which, like, it is so incredibly easy for these people to just go and set up. There are millions of dollars being siphoned out of the normal economies of regular countries that are just being extracted by rich people. The comparison is to a neo-feudalism where the national economies are productive for the sake of these people who own massive amounts of property privately and then just continue to accumulate that property that they're not paying any taxes on. They're not accountable to other fellow citizens, to people, because realistically, these people do not view themselves as your equals. They view themselves as better than you. They are entitled to the fruits of the fruits of your labor, and they conceive of themselves as being fundamentally better than you or I.
Until we come with wrenches into the corporate offices. I mean, the answer to this is collectivization, right? But that's something that the United States in particular is so aggressively against, right? Like, collective action is collectivization in particular, right? The idea that we should act what is the best for a group, our subgroup, right? Is something that like just doesn't actually get talked about enough, because in not acting in that way, we're allowed to be piecemealed off, right? Like, this group is this way, this group is that way, and it allows the disintegration of any kind of mass that could become problematic, right? But people like don't know the history of America is what really is going on here, right? Like, you look at the history of like labor strikes and labor union engagements in the United States, you would recognize that the way that we got everything that we have today is through collectivization. The reason we have a 40-hour work week is because of collectivization. The reason we have paid time off is because of collectivization. The reason why we have federal holidays is because of collectivization. It used to be you don't work on the 4th of July.
The reason we have Labor Day off is because of an event called the Haymarket Massacre. And if you want to go and learn about why you have Labor Day, You should be looking at the union activists and the anarchists and the communists that got murdered by the fucking Pinkertons in order like work striking for a living wage and reasonable working conditions. And that is what Labor Day is for, not your fucking barbecue, although like you should barbecue and hang out and enjoy your day off. But like the reason that we have it is not because like Daddy Musk is so fucking benevolent, right? Like these are not benevolent people. These aren't people who care about you or me. These are people who want to see off to their own interest, and they want to sell flights to fucking Mars so that when they ruin the world, they've got a backup plan, and the rest of us are sitting here screwed. Sure, they'll save enough of us for a workforce up there. But
yeah, and the other aspect of it though is like, it's cool that there's innovation and all those sorts of things, but those things don't stop because of money.
most innovation is done in the public sector anyway. The reason the internet exists is not because of Apple or Microsoft. It's because of like Stanford University and the military.
No, that's not my point though. Like, so you picked on Elon, right?
Right.
I mean, like, Elon's clearly doing a lot of innovation, but he could do that innovation at less of a profit margin and still do that innovation. The greed that goes along with that innovation is the problem, right? Like an individual that can go from, what was his original? He was like, didn't he have a bunch of Napster? PayPal, right? Makes his money off of PayPal, right? Like not a particular. It's a good way of. It's a great market tool, right? But it's not like that's ingenious, and then he uses that money to recreate money, right? But he does that through anti-unionization, right? Like the idea of unionization within like a Tesla plant is unheard of, and will not occur because he would just fire everybody. And so what you really have is you have a robber baron, right?
Yeah,
And
or like even assuming, and this is something because I have some friends who are big Elon stans, like they love him so much. And the example I always use is when I talk about these sorts of like this individual like innovation that is all individualized. It's all about like what one or two people could do. Like a small number of people could realistically do it, but everybody's like, oh, it's so futuristic. It makes them think like the Jetsons, right? But in reality, it's like these individuated solutions that are really only going to be accessible to the super rich. I think there's an example of like I forget what cities it's in, but he has this whole thing where he wants to build these like underground car tunnels.
no, it's called the Hyperloop, and they actually are being built.
This isn't Hyperloop. This is a different project. This is like you drive your car into these tunnels and you basically like have a single shot like car lane underground. Hold on, let me.
Well, he does believe that the only way to go that we can't go up anymore, so now the reason is to go down, right? Like subterranean is the answer, right?
Which maybe he's right, but like
I don't doubt that the man's brilliant, right? Like I just don't think that he has to make the profit that he's making to be brilliant.
And also he's directing those towards individuated solutions that are not necessarily in like the what's good for the collective, right? Because realistically, if we wanted to solve transportation problems, what we would do is we would look at the way that we're designing cities. We would make them less friendly for cars, more friendly for pedestrians and biking. We would add more public transit options. We would actively.
Okay.
There was like a really loud whistle outside, and it sounded like a police car, but I think that's what it was because it didn't do
for
you. It did we did the ooh part. Anyway, sorry,
I'm coming for you.
But like the real solutions to these problems of like, oh, it sucks getting around in a city is not to like dig down and build in all this new infrastructure that like only serves one or two cars at a time. It's to, have buses and tram systems. It's to have urban green spaces and to make
the Hyperloop's not a bad idea.
No, it's not. No, and it's not. And if we want to ever talk about Hyperloop, my roommate from college worked on they did this Hyperloop competition and they patented this brake that A&M owns the patent for and stuff like that. But like he's working for, I think, one of the big aerospace companies, I think Lockheed, if I'm not mistaken, but not in like the murder people department, but in the like.
That's what they want you to.
That's
what he wants you to think. He's really making murderous attack drones that are completely autonomous so that they can murder brown people with absolute immunity. That's the project he's working on. These are your friends.
I mean, I do worry about those sorts of things, believe it or not. But no, I mean, like it's the point is, it's like, yeah, I agree. Hyperloop is a cool idea, but is the investment money, the limited amount of investment money that the public has, is that the solution that we should be investing that money in?
But he's not asking us. Right, that's like the ultimate. That's the ultimate weird thing about him, right? Like he does things that traditionally would be considered public marketplaces, but he does them for private entities, as a private entity, and tries to make profit off.
Hold on, isn't NASA like doing a bunch of contracting with SpaceX now?
Well, yeah, because he was the only one that was launching rockets in the continental United States.
I just don't understand why we can't.
It's him or the Russians, right? Like that's how people are getting to the space station now, right? Like
bring back the goddamn space program, Nick.
I'm for the space program.
Big fans of the space program.
I JFK the shit out of space program. You make me president, okay? We gonna go places.
Who are you gonna compete against though? The Chinese?
Oh, dude, we're just gonna compete against ourselves. We gonna get to Mars and build a base. And I don't care if that makes sense. I don't care if we need to do that or not. We're just going to do it to say that we did. And then we're going to claim all of Mars for America.
America.
We're going to actually call it New Red America. We're going to rename the whole planet.
Oh, you know what? So you know how like America has all these cities that are based on the idea that are based on cities in Europe? Are we going to have like New Kansas on Mars?
No. They're going to be red everything. Red York, red Jersey, red England.
I just like the attacking news onto things. So like New York or New Jersey.
So you're going very Futurama with this.
Yeah. Or like New Kansas, right? That's my favorite one. We can go and set up New Texas, Nick. Twice the ye, 3 times the haw.
Only if it's 5 times as big as Texas.
Yeah, of course. Wait, 76 times the size of Texas because it's 2 times the 3 times.
We can just call the entirety of the ice cap on the top of it Alaska. We won't actually call it New Alaska. We'll just call it Alaska and be done with it.
All right. No, but I mean, like, look, these public works programs, these infrastructure programs, we whether or not Elon is profiting off of them or not, I think is largely irrelevant. I think we need to stop like these private contracts and sort of these large, privately funded infrastructure projects, and instead focus on these like collective solutions that we know work to reduce traffic, to reduce emissions, to make people happier with the communities that they live in. Because shockingly, when you have communities that are bike and walking friendly, people actually use them.
You know what I want? You know the Beltway? Okay. Mm-hmm. I want the Beltway to not be a road, but to instead be a like super speedy train. And then I want all the outlets from that to be super speedy trains to various places that you would obviously need to be. So I want to get to work in 15 minutes. Okay.
I used to be able to walk to work in 5 minutes, Nick.
Well, you know what? I unfortunately made my girlfriend go from a 2-minute drive to a 40-minute drive to work, so it's all my fault, honestly. I'm a bad person.
Yeah.
But I want like a super fast rail. Gets me from east side of town to Sugarland in a moment.
I am kind of excited for this this light rail system that they're talking about between Houston and Dallas.
I'd use the shit out of it.
I would. Are you kidding? We would never drive to a debate tournament in Dallas again.
We could justify it too. We'd just get even if we needed a vehicle, we'd just rent it in Dallas.
Right, exactly. Because that would be so much better. I hate driving. I'm the account like being responsible for other people's kids is scary enough. Being responsible for other people's kids inside of a steel death trap is even scarier.
But then think about it also, right? Like, so it would be like airports, right? You know, like you exit the airport and then boom, there's like an Avis right there.
Right.
It'd be the same thing just at a train station.
Yeah, but there's like a lot less driving that's actually happening.
Yeah, because
Which,
you just stop
to be fair, if you're
the
going to get
5 hour drive, right?
yeah, to be fair, if you're going to get in a wreck, you're more likely to get in a wreck in Dallas because it's unfamiliar roads and it's people in Dallas drive like crazy
And it's all under construction all the time.
yeah. Yeah. So like I understand that realistically, like there's still the possibility for like an accident or something like that. I just think that like cutting out that whole middle drive would be awesome. Like last time we went to Dallas, last year for a tournament of a private school that I'm not going to mention. We ended up getting stuck in traffic for an hour because there had been a semi rollover. Imagine not having to deal with that. The worst thing we'd have to deal with light rail is like a cow on the tracks or something. I don't know.
For sure. So last thing I want to talk about, and I don't know if you've ever seen this before, so I'm going to pull it up and I'm going to put it on the screen so other people can see it.
Okay,
It's the federal. It's a federal example of where our tax dollars go to. And my problem with it is it's bullshit. It's a lie. So it shows our. Can you see the stream?
I can.
So it shows our federal tax dollars as percentages, right? This is the budget goes towards, right? And then these are the different things. But the thing that it doesn't tell you here, and the most important aspect that it doesn't tell you here, is only 2 of these things pay in directly to the actual income of the Federal Reserve, of the federal government, right? So Social Security is 23% of the federal budget, but it's also 18% of the of federal revenues, right? So there is a discrepancy there. There's a 5% discrepancy there, right? So we are losing some money on Social Security, but we aren't losing 23% of our budget on Social Security. It's really more like 5% of our budget because it pays for itself up to that 5%. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but Nick, if we did that, people would be looking at it and they'd say, "Oh, wow, safety net programs are only 8%. We could really like use the money to like help people who are struggling." And that's no good. We can't have that in this country. No way, no how.
Actually, the problem with it is that if you actually do this graph correctly, so I'll point this out, I'm not the best at math. This 8% actually decreases by percentile. Because the defense and international security assistance goes from 16% to nearly 40% of the budget. Because Social Security is only 5%. Then Medicaid almost pays for all of the Medicare Medicaid chip by itself. Like 3.4% is not paid for. You have 5% and 3.4%, but that makes up 50%. You have to look at the other half of your graph and realize that defense and international security assistance is really more like 35 to 40% of the budget. They make this graph just like this for a reason. The reason they make this graph like this is so that you don't think that we're spending half our economy on defense spending. But we are.
Yeah. There's a great documentary that I watched earlier this week that I was reminded exists. It's called Why We Fight. It came out in 2006. And it's about the sort of lobbying system and the contract system from these defense companies and the sort of push that has made towards the invasion of Iraq. They historicize it a little bit in the context of the post-World War II era, et cetera, et cetera. And it's a very good documentary. It's an easy watch. It's up there with documentaries I have enjoyed, along with like Hypernormalization and Outfoxed and things like that.
Yeah, I don't know. I just think it's disingenuous the way that we present things to individuals so that they think that there's a certain world that exists, but it doesn't, right? Like we just spend a ridiculous amount of money on our thing. I just sent you the link so that you can send that to city council.
Okay. Most Americans, I think the problem is that most Americans would not consent to live like this. There has to be a contrived narrative as to why things have to be like this. And I think that, like, if people had a realistic picture of what sorts of money is made in this country and how productive our economy is, and then looking at how they don't really see the benefits of that proportional to their labor, that most Americans would not consent to that system. So the ruse has to be maintained.
Yeah, and I mean it's one of these things where it's like you're literally paying to kill other people in other poor people in other parts of the world. That's what you're doing.
Yeah, there's that Mike Preisner speech that I sent you. The enemy isn't poor people on the other side of the world. It's the people who are denying you health care. It's the people who are cutting your education budgets. It's the
The people
people
are taking the people who actually fight those wars and then not giving them health care.
kicking those people out of their homes.
How many of these, to bring it all back to focus, right? If you've been here since the very beginning, how many of these individuals in San Antonio's 5th district are veterans of foreign wars that are losing their homes in these sorts of interactions, right? How many of these individuals bought their homes, their grandfathers bought their homes on a GI Bill after World War II, right? How many of these people's livelihoods, their entire American dream, are being crushed by business interests, right? And if anything from this episode has been clear, and anything from the interview with Miss Castillo has been clear, is that the ultimate enemy when it comes to our discussions and to our understandings is business moneyed interests that acts together as a class against us in a way that we don't act back against them in the same way. There are far more of us than there are them. And it's important for us to recognize they see it as an us and a them, even if you don't.
Class unity is super important. Sectarianism is stupid. Multiple strategies. We need multiple trains running all at once. Electoralism is good. Community organizing is good. Mutual aid programs are good. We can do all of those things together. They are not mutually exclusive to each other. We can walk and chew gum with at the same time, whatever the expression is. Like, we're smarter and we are more capable than the people in positions of power want you to believe that you are. And we are even stronger and even smarter when we work together to do that. The greatest evolutionary advantage that humans have had over other animals that have allowed us to survive to this point is our ability to cooperate in groups and to innovate collectively.
Just to pick up on that, our most ancient ancestor, to give you the actual anthropology of that statement, right? Our oldest ancestor is the Australopithecus, and its major change from a monkey was that it started standing upright and had the ability to throw rocks. Those were its two distinct differences. What we know is that these animals lived right on the edge of the prairie, and the reason they didn't live in the prairie is there were very, very large animals that would eat them. And the way that they defended themselves and the major innovation that they came up with, all those hundreds of millions of years ago, or hundreds of thousands of years ago, I don't know, whatever, right, was that they learned that if I pick up a rock and I throw it at a saber-toothed tiger, it pisses off the saber-toothed tiger and it eats me. However, if we all pick up rocks and throw it at the saber-toothed tiger runs away.
Or dies.
And we have a good meal.
Also, I don't mean to nitpick your analogy, but the Savannah hypothesis has been disproven, especially with the arboreal adaptations in the arms of the Australopiths. Like my anthropology degree, my professor was literally one of the people who digs these things up out of the ground.
I like my theory better.
And by the way, human origin is South Africa, not East Africa. Olduvai Gorge is a bunch of people who are clinging on to their biased theories, and I said it. I did it for who are just hanging on to their little pet theories. The cradle of life is in South Africa.
What's the oldest language then, if not Bantu?
Probably some Mesopotamian dialect, because that's where like, or wait, that doesn't make any sense.
Oh, it doesn't.
The oldest written language is Sanskrit. I know that.
We don't actually know that.
That's what
The
we have.
oldest surviving.
Yeah, that's what we have record of, which is all we can really make, assumptive claims off of. But that also like devalues oral traditions and stuff like that. And we probably shouldn't
What
do
we
that.
figured out today is that Eric is anti-Bantu, and thus he hates all East African. Uh,
Bantu is my favorite language group to talk about in my psychology classes, though.
because of the clicking.
Uh, yeah, partially. But I use a lot of examples. But like I use it when we're talking about like the idea that a child will acquire any language from any group that it's put into. So like you can take a little. I always like.
And I feel like we just lost. Yeah, we did. Okay, cool. So I'm still here. We're reconnecting.
We're confused.
Okay, I lost that. We're gonna call it a night. Partisan podcast. Have a great night. Episode 12. We got a city councilwoman use the F bomb 3 times.
Pretty cool. All right. Have a good night.